Bum 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 bum. Mark 5 of the Gospels of Mark chapter 5. They came to the other side of the sea, to the territory of the Gerasenes, and they got out of the boat once. When they got out of the boat, at once a man from the tombs who had an unclean spirit met him. The man who had been dwelling amongst the tombs, and no one could restrain him any longer. Even the man had been dwelling among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any longer, even with a chain. Huh? Oh, madam. Okay. In fact, he had frequently been bound to shackles and chains, but the chains had been pulled apart by him and the shackles smashed, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. And those are like steel chains too. Or iron chains. Ooh, Superman. Night and day among the tombs and on the hillsides he was crying out and bruising himself with stones, having some kind of epileptic seizure, like schizophrenia, demonic schizophrenia. Ooh, shudders to think. He's in a grave cemetery too, you know. Catching sight of Jesus from a distance, he ran up and prostrated himself before him, crying out in a loud voice, "What have you done? What have you done to me?" Crying out in a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." He had been saying to him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Then he asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "Legion is my name, and there are many of us." And he pleaded earnestly with him not to drive them away. From that territory. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there on a hillside. They pleaded with him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." And he let them, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. The herd of about 2,000 rushed towards the steep bank into the sea, where they all drowned. The swine into the town, and throughout the countryside people came out to see what had happened. And as they approached Jesus, they caught sight of a man who had been possessed by a legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind, and they were seized with fear. Those who witnessed the incident explained to him what had happened to the possessed man and to the swine. Then they began to beg him to leave their district. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed pleaded to remain with him, but he would not permit him, but told him and said, "Go home to your family, and announce to them all what the Lord in his pity has done for you." Then the man went off and began to proclaim in Decapolis what Jesus had done for him, and all were amazed. Then Jesus had crossed again in a boat to the other side. A large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet. Then he pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands upon her, that he may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors, and had spent all that she had, yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. When she heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "But if I touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up, and she felt her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that powers had gone out of him, turned to the crowd. Jesus, aware at once that powers had gone out of him, turned to the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But the disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And she looked around to see who had done it. Then the woman realized what had happened to her. Approached in fear and trembling, she fell down before Jesus and told him the truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany. Just have faith. He did not allow anyone to accompany him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion and people weeping and wailing loudly. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to him, "Why this commotion and weeping? This child is not dead but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," means, "Little girl, I say unto you, arise." The little girl of 12 rose immediately and walked about. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said she should be given something to eat. Okay, so this is now Act 5, Chapter 5, or Chapter 6 now. Boop. Thank you for watching our show. We're gonna have a great night. Actually, I have a great night right now because I'm on Chapter 6.